Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday Times Roundtable, where each week we engage in conversation around current global issues, trends, problems, and opportunities that are of interest to you. Our weekly Tuesday Times Roundtables are made possible through a formal partnership between the Office of Global Learning Initiatives and the New York Times. This partnership also provides you, FIU students, faculty, and staff with free digital access to the New York Times newspaper. I am Sherry Beeson, one of your hosts, as are Anna Prado here in the back, and Michelle Zaldivar, who is monitoring this session live in Zoom. We want to make you aware of our quick reminders. First of all, this session is being recorded. Global Learning Medallion students can earn 1 point for attending this event. If you got a ticket for lunch, make sure you grab it on your way out. And if you'd like to know more about the Global Learning Medallion, Peace Corps Prep, or just our general Global Learning program, please stick around afterwards and talk with Michelle, Anna, or with me. We'd be happy to answer your questions. So whether you are joining us live here, face-to-face, or via Zoom, we're glad you're here. Later during this session, we will be taking your questions. If you're joining via Zoom, please post your questions in the chat, and Michelle will share them with us. Otherwise, Anna and I will be walking around with a mic to make sure your questions are addressed. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Karla Kennedy. Yay! Professor Kennedy is a Miami native and former high school teacher and student media advisor. But she has been a proponent of student voice since she was a high school newspaper editor. She graduated with her bachelor's degree in telecommunications from the University of Miami and went on to earn her master's degree in student media advising from our very own FIU. Yay! She then earned a doctorate degree in mass communication from the University of Florida. Kennedy then came to FIU after working with the University of Oregon as the Scholastic Journalism Outreach Coordinator and the Executive Director of the Northwest Scholastic Press Association. She currently serves as the College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts Director of Online Programs here at FIU and continues to advocate for student speech. Please join me in formally welcoming Dr. Karla Kennedy.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to just take this mask down for a little bit so that, there you go, so you can actually hear me. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for acknowledging that student speech is something that we should be talking about and dealing with. And it's great to be here. It's actually great to be back on MMC. I haven't been here since before the pandemic, so it's been a minute. So it's great to be here. I was like, hey, I remember that door. I remember those stairs. I remember those people. It's great. So before we kind of do the deep dive into, the latest Supreme Court case that had to do with student speech in teacher fashion, we got to go back, and we got to think about what are the origins and what are the pieces and how does all of these things actually get to fit together. So let's go back a little bit to our good friend, TJ, that's my boy, Thomas Jefferson, who started to think about how people should be educated. So we started to think about the democracy, okay? So we're going to form this we've already formed this wonderful nation, this wonderful union, and we're talking about democratic principles, and it's democracy this and democracy that and democracy. Now, what does that mean, right? Besides just you get to vote for who you want to vote for, you have a voice, what does that mean, and how do we teach the current Americans at that time how to be democratic? Right? How to participate in this democracy. So we go back and TJ kind of says, listen, we need to figure out a way to educate folks. So we come up with this concept of compulsory education, right? So we're going to say to them, while you're out there doing all your farming and hoeing and tending to your animals and getting your crops together, we want to make sure that you're educated enough so that you can govern yourself. So the foundation for compulsory education came from the concept, several different concepts, but let's concentrate on this one concept of being able to govern. So you had to have knowledge in order to govern, and we wanted you to get used to having a voice. You need to be able to say something, and other people want to listen. So we don't want to suppress your voice. We want to give you a voice. So remember, new nation. Then John Dewey comes along a little while later and says, you know what? Here's all these different other reasons why we want to do compulsory education. Because it gives everybody a level playing field. So everybody is able to have these wonderful discussions and to participate in this. And you'll hear this in education and you'll hear this in journalism, the marketplace of ideas. So when you come to the marketplace of ideas, your idea will not be suppressed. It will be respected and it will be heard. Right? So here we are. That's the foundation. Then, somewhere along the line, stuff started to get a little dicey and a little thick and a little more controversial, right? So I can say what I want to say. Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's great. So how do we figure out what you can't say and when you can't say it and how you can't say it and when something that you say steps on the feet or hurts someone else's feelings or stifles someone else's speech? When do we figure that out? So here we go. Come on, Supreme Court. You got to start making these decisions about speech. You got to know when to chill it. You got to define political speech. You got to define, hate speech. You got to define all of these different types of speeches so that people know, yeah, you can speak, but here are the exceptions. Here are the rules. Here's when you can, and here's when you can't, right? Then in 1968, this wonderful little girl says, hey, I'm going to wear this armband to protest the Vietnam War. Now, of course, I'm taking you a short jump in history. I'm not trying to, because there's a whole lot more that we can talk about, but let's take it to good old Mary Beth Tinker in 1968, puts this armband on, goes to school, black armband, and says, listen, this is my silent protest of the Vietnam War. I'm not standing outside, I'm not shaking anybody down, I ain't got no banners and no placards, I'm not passing out any flyers, I'm not causing any disruptions. I'm just sitting in my class with my armband on. And, side note, I did get to meet Mary Beth. Wow, it's like, she to me is like this beacon. So it's like, oh my God, can you take a picture with me? She's like my Beyonce, right? For you guys, like there's like, or Shakira or whatever. It's like, oh my God, I'm standing next to Mary Beth Tinker. And she tells this wonderful story of how she just was this perfect little student. She wasn't trying to cause any problems. She just felt so strongly about this. And her parents supported her after a meeting and yada, yada. And her brother and her cousin show up with these bands. And she says that they called her into the office and she actually took it off the very first day because she was scared. Here's this nice little kid just trying to do what they need to do, right? But saying, don't I have a right? Then guess what happens? She puts it back on the next day and the next day until they suspend her and then she stops wearing it, right? In order to go back to school. Little did she know at the time, and most of the time when you talk to anybody from Supreme Court cases that are still around and kicking, they always said, I didn't mean to become this, I just was trying to do this. Which is same cases we're going to come and we see the cheerleader, right? They're just trying to live their lives. They're not trying to make anything huge. They're just saying, this is how I feel now, and this is what I did, and I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do this, and who stepped on my rights, and did I step on anybody else's rights? So Mary Beth goes, and then all of a sudden we get landmark case, 1968, Supreme Court, 7-2, Tinker versus Des Moines, right? As the school system takes her to court. Oh, she actually takes the school system to court, my bad. And she says, listen, I think that you stepped on my First Amendment rights, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, and there wasn't any issue going on, and why couldn't I do what I did? And then that's when the Supreme Court, for the first time, come up saying, hey, guess what? You're right. Familiar and famous wording is Teachers and students do not shed their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. So we have a right to speak. We have a right to protest. We have a right. All of those nice little First Amendment pieces that are there, we have those rights inside the schoolhouse gate. Big win for student rights. Big win for student speech. But it didn't last long. Because once again, evolution. Here comes this other concept of, wait a minute, how can I push the boundaries? So in 1988, we have a couple of cases. Well, 1986, we have a case. 1988, we have a case. But in 1988 is our big cases, Hazelwood versus Cole Meyer, where these high school students try to put out this newspaper, guess what, talking about teenage pregnancy and divorce. In 1983, those are taboo subjects. Oh my God, I can't believe that you're talking about that. Like, what? Right? We're sitting there going, for real? Right? But then I remembered, I was in high school in 1983. I remember, yeah, those were kind of taboo subjects. You know, my parents had gone through a divorce, but unlike the other folks, I was cheering it on. Yes, right? But guess what? Not everybody saw it that way, right? So then they write these articles and then they go through this whole concept and the principal says, you can't publish that. What do you mean we can't publish it? We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of the press. You can't publish that. So what do? They actually publish, it's called a spectrum. And you could Google this if you want. They actually publish the paper and they like black out where the stories were supposed to be. So they publish the paper with all of these black boxes. And then they say, hey, you violated our rights. Goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, well, kind of, maybe not. Tinker doesn't apply in this case because you are a student publication funded by your school and the school board. So they have a right to censor you. They have a right, we coined this phrase, prior review. They have a right to see what you're going to do before you actually do it. And then, oh my God, the schools were like, yay, whoo, we can do it. And then what happens? A lot of states are like, wait a minute, no, we don't want our kids to do that. We want to go back to, boom, compulsory education. Let's teach them how to be democratic citizens inside the schoolhouse gates. Makes sense, right? But even when I talk to people from Miami and Fort Lauderdale and South Florida, folks, y'all don't even know that schools are censored. Not in Miami-Dade County, of course, because student publications actually have First Amendment rights. This was done by folks at like Coral Gables Senior High and Miami High from back in the day. They were like, y'all ain't, we're not even gonna go with this. We're not even gonna allow you to do this to our students. So they came together and they passed what they called guideline, what was it, guideline 25, I think at that point. And they said, here's the guideline and this is what we can't do. But Miami-Dade is the only county in the state of Florida, the only county in the state of Florida that is afforded those wonderful rights. Broward, no. Palm Beach, no. Monroe, no. Alachua, where the University of Florida is, woo, go Gators, no. Right? There is no other county. So then you have states rising up saying, this is an issue, this is a problem, we gotta fix this. And so California, boom, straight to it. They got three, they don't play. They protect private schools, they protect public schools, they protect middle schools, they protect high schools, they protect colleges, they like, we're not having that, right? We're gonna make sure that everybody practices democracy. Go back to what Thomas Jefferson said, to what John Dewey said. The whole concept of compulsory education is so that we can learn how to be citizens before we are citizens. Makes sense, doesn't it? Makes a lot of sense. But then the courts were like, or maybe not. And then our good friend Clarence Thomas, oh my gosh. Okay. Let me tell you why I do that for Clarence Thomas. So my dissertation is about bong hits for Jesus. It's a 2007. Yeah, bong hits for Jesus. I love that, right? The side note is my dissertation advisor was like, man, you got the best. I was like, yeah, I got the best 2-minute, there was a 30-second elevator speech ever. What is your dissertation on, Carla? Bong hits for Jesus. They're like, whoa, tell me more, right? So bong hits for Jesus was a case out in Alaska in 2007 that actually it was 2004 is where it started. And then was the running of the Olympics torch for the Winter Olympics, and the torch was coming across the school, and this guy, this cool kid, decided that he's gonna make a sign that said, "Bong hits for Jesus." And he and two of his friends stand across the street from the school, and they hold up the sign, "Bong hits for Jesus." They get suspended. And he was like, wait, hold on. First Amendment rights. It wasn't on school property, wasn't on school grounds. He wasn't even in attendance for school. You know, like when you step on school grounds, you have to go in and they have to take attendance and so forth and so on. None of that, right? He's like, I'm doing this on my own time. And then the principal's like, yeah, but you're encouraging ninth graders to smoke, to do drugs. Now remember, Supreme Court is usually always going to decide a case based on what is going on in the community at the time, what's in the nation. One of the reasons why, Mary Beth won her case with the Supreme Court is because there was civil rights going on, the Vietnam War was going on, and the country was up at arms. There was a whole lot of controversy, and people were on different sides, and it was like, you know what? Let's give them the right to be able to have speech. Now, fast forward to Frazier, and he says, yeah, we're trying not, the drug war was it was all of this, and we were writing about it and thinking about it, and so it was like, yeah, no, you lose. So the student lost. Right? And it's funny, it's like when I read the brief, he even talks about Thomas Jefferson when he's sitting in the assistant principal's office. I am practicing, and I am doing democracy, and you are in my rights. And it was like, yeah, no, right? So a couple of things we learned from that, but we can talk about that at another round table. But the whole concept is that the United States, we don't really know what we want to do as far as free speech for students. And how do we regulate it? And what do we do to, what happens, right? So my brother is a former assistant principal, and of course you could imagine the debates that we've had, but his deal is like, we need to know so that we can do XYZ so that XYZ WPMO doesn't happen. And you're like, yeah, but how can you make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So it doesn't matter if the kid actually says it's gonna happen, it might not happen. And the kid, and so we see all of these things that happen, and they're happening at schools now. And is a school really a community? And should they have, like you guys have police officers in high school. I didn't have a police officer in high school. There was no need for a police officer in my high school, right? I'm moving.
Could you move behind the podium, please?
Okay.
Somehow the sound is not picking you up. The system isn't picking you up as much as we want.
Is it? But I think that, is this? No. I thought that was me. Was that me?
No,
Oh, okay. So I need to be here?
that's perfect.
Okay. So no more, my lavalier is going? Okay.
You can leave it, it will create the
Okay.
feedback loop.
That's all right. All right, so what we find out is that we're not sure of how to regulate student speech. And there's this whole concept of off-campus speech that we knew, those of us that have been studying this and looking at this saying, how are you going to judge, especially when it came in, internet is here and there, blah, blah, blah. We weren't, of course, prepared for social media and Twitter and Facebook and Insta and all this kind of stuff. We weren't prepared for that. So how do you keep a student from saying what they want to say when they're sitting outside of your school ground, right? They have First Amendment rights. If they're sitting at their school, in their home, and they're on their own computer, they're not using any of the resources provided by your school. They're using their own computer, their own internet, their own words. How do you stop them from saying this school, da 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 da? How do you stop that? And so the school, in this case of the cheerleader, and if you haven't read it, it's some colorful language, I'm not gonna repeat that, where she was like, this is, right? And that was her way of kind of saying, like throwing down that last card. She was just real frustrated and real upset, and like, right? And then somebody took a screenshot of it. Oh, Lord, here we go, screenshots and all kinds of stuff. So you can't even say it and then take it down, right? You say it, it's out there, right? And one of the biggest things that we try to teach kids in scholastic journalism is when you put something on the internet, it is gone. It's gone. Say goodbye to it. It's gone, right? because you never know what server is holding on to it. You never know how long it stays there. You never know who has access to it. And remember, whenever you post anything, that server actually owns that, right? So AT&T owns everything that you put out when you don't AT&T. Right? When you go to Subway and you use their server, I'm going to save my little 5G, I'm going to use their server. Guess what? Everything that you text, tweet, post, the money that you use to pay, all of that is on their server. All of that. Right? And they have the right to say whether or not they want to give it up if the Supreme Court comes a knocking, knock, or whether or not they don't want to. Say, nope, not going to do it. Right? So this cheerleader said what she had to say, and then she put it on social media, took it down. Somebody took a picture of it. She says she got suspended. Y'all suspended me incorrectly, almost like my guy Bong Hits and Bong Hits for Jesus, and goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court rules in her favor. Why? Right? Doesn't she have the right? And this is what the Supreme Court says. I love it. The Supreme Court never just says, that's wrong. They say, it kind of is, but let's think about it. It's kind of right, but here's the rules that you have to apply, right? So they're not backing up on what they decided in Hazelwood, which was we can't post anything obscene, we can't, or profane, we can't libel anyone, can't tell any lies, can't make up any stuff, and then also you can't cite a disruption. So you can't write an article that says, okay, everybody third period on October the 2nd, I need for y'all all to run to the front of the school and we're going to boycott Dr. Kennedy's class, right? Can't do that, right? Those are three things that you can't do, which is kind of the same thing for regular journalists, right? You really can't do that. So yeah, they can't do that, but schools need to be careful at disciplining students who are using off-campus speech, right? So now, does that mean that we're going to did we open the door for people to be able to say what they want to say? No, definitely not. So it is a concept of them saying, well, she was just frustrated. She really wasn't, she just wanted to express herself. And if she wrote it in the newspaper, and which is true, if she took out an ad in the Miami Herald or the Sun Sentinel or something online, she could have taken out the ad and said everything that she wanted to say about the school right then and there. Did the school have a right to suspend her for that? No. Can the school be upset about that? Of course, right? But who is right in this, right? Where are we? So we have to go back again to my whole concept of compulsory education, my whole concept of curriculum. What are we teaching in the schools? What are we looking at, right? And our whole concept of if we teach students how to use speech correctly, then we won't have the issue of them using it incorrectly. Right? But if we tell students, don't say this, you are not allowed to do this, right? And then they start to think, hey, wait a minute, hold on. I'm at my house, I'm doing this, I can do that. And then it starts to get really muddy and really gray. So I always say, if we don't continuously chill student speech and we actually teach them how to use it, and we teach them, number one, that they have a voice, and we teach them what they should be using the voice for, right? Do we really care about whether or not you made the cheerleading team? No. But do we really care about how you feel about climate, right? The planet, voting, financial aid, loans, going to school, being able to vote, being able to live where you want to live, being able to make the money that you want to make? Do we care about what you say about it? Yes. And that's what students should be using their speech. But we are so afraid to allow them the chance to do that. We can't be like that. We need to think bigger. We need to go back to compulsory education. We need to think about the fact that we're not trying to chill their speech. We're trying to help them promote it and tailor it so that we can make a better world for all of us. Is that my time? Where am I?
I'm right here with you.
Oh, I know, right? No one's here.
12:55, so we can, if you've got more to say, you've got time, or we can go to question and answer.
Okay. So what I would like to do, and I didn't talk at all about kind of college speech. So college speech, the Supreme Court has stayed away from it. Right? There were a couple of cases about a yearbook, and because the funding is the issue. Like, so each college has a different funding model for the student newspaper, student publications, so forth and so on, right? And then you've got, the board of trustees and the president of the university, and, like, if you run a real, true newspaper in a college, you're supposed to be they're supposed to be writing about what's wrong in the college, right? It's not, or the university is not just like, oh, there's a big old PR piece and, this is how great our band is #1. Yeah, that's fine. But we need to know that the band needs more money for uniforms, and why isn't there, a fee that helps that, right? This kind of thing, right? So that's what's challenging about universities, is the funding model. Whereas with high schools and middle schools, K through 12, we kind of know what the federal government is who funds them. They're not getting any private money. They're not getting any type of donations. They're getting straight, government funded money, and they might be supplementing it with grants here and there, but it's a different funding model. So, of course, it comes down to who pays for what, right? Because I think it would be rather challenging for, like editorials about what's going on at any university, and the university is actually paying for that publication. So it's a little sticky, to say the very least, right? There would be some challenges. So the Supreme Court just kind of said, I'm gonna let y'all kind of deal with that. Lower courts have tried, but the Supreme Court's like, yeah, we're really not interested in seeing that type of case, because, we really, by this time they're adults. There's way too many little sticky points. Whereas in K through 12, you have the kids that are 9th grade or 6th grade. They shouldn't be hearing this. Or they shouldn't be saying this. And so there's always cool cases. I mean, if you ever want to kind of like Google some of the cases that have to do with student speech, there's cases about the Confederate flag. Whether or not the kid can wear a Confederate flag to school. One girl had a Confederate flag dress. There's cases about yearbook. I think Broward just had one a couple of years ago, or maybe last year. The pandemic has kind of messed up my gauge of time, but whether or not whether or not there should be anything about Black Lives Matter, like they were really upset about, they shouldn't be publishing that in the yearbook. It's like, do y'all understand what a yearbook is? It's a yearbook. It's called a yearbook for a reason, because it's supposed to actually be the history of that school in the year, right? So it's the yearbook. And it should talk about what social issues that are going through. Like, it's not just, oh, look at all the little cute people, and they had, they had pizza for lunch, or it's not that. It's, it's actually supposed to document what happened, so that when somebody picks that up in a time capsule 100 years from now, hopefully we'll still be here, that they'll say, oh, wow, look at the crazy stuff they wore, or look at their crazy haircut, or wow, they were really dealing with recycling, because they're going to solve that issue by then, right? So they're going to look at it and say, this is crazy. This is what they were doing. Right? So yearbooks are actually history books. And so I've seen, the principal took out a picture of the young lady because she wanted in her, her graduation picture, how we're supposed to wear those feathers and she's like, I don't feel that. That's not who I am. So she put on a tie and a jacket, and the principal took her picture out. And of course she said, I think you're kind of stepping on my rights. And so the other hard part with scholastic journalism is once administration kind of makes the decision, you can kind of go against it, but to rectify it is, what they say afterwards, like, sorry, but the yearbook's been published and your picture wasn't in it. Like, they can't go back and publish another 2,000 yearbooks, and then people bring your old yearbook back that everybody signed for this new yearbook, because this now includes everybody's picture. It's all inclusive, so a lot of the stuff that we have to fight about in scholastic journalism, we have to be strong enough to know that it is going to take a while, right? And sometimes we won't really be able to see it, see a rectifying piece to it until afterwards, right? So, in like Hazelwood versus Cole Meyer, Kathy Cole Meyer was actually in 11th grade when the case went to Supreme Court, because all the students who had actually written in the newspaper, remember the Spectrum, they had already graduated. They were in their second and third year, in college. So actually, she and I are friends on Facebook. She loves my afro, which I think is hilarious. But we've taken pictures together and we've been at symposiums together. And again, it's like sitting next to a rock star. But it's always like you expect for them to be like gleaming and glowing, and they're wonderful, educated, great people. But they keep saying, I was not prepared for this, right? For the light to be shined on them. They're like, what? But we're just so glad that they did, right? Because you do have to stand up, right? So, yeah, I've seen so many things. The Confederate flag, I did a paper on that one. That one was really interesting to see how people try to compare the Confederate flag to a picture of Malcolm X. And, well, you can't wear your Black History shirt if I can't wear my Confederate flag shirt. And so you're like, okay. And so the Supreme Court will never be able to rule on the Confederate flag because it is, history versus heritage, and how do you prove one versus the other. So they pretty much just allow schools to kind of say, you can't do this, you can't wear this type of outfit, you can't do this kind of thing. And we've always talked about what students dress. We always talk about what students say. It's always going to be a challenge, right? And, I, for one, would like to see more Americans actually, stand up for student speech. Because when, we see the Supreme Court, part of my research was looking at how the society viewed student speech based on the Supreme Court ruling from Bong Hits for Jesus. And everybody was kind of like, so what? Just so. Yeah, he shouldn't have had that sign, and But it's not the whole concept of whether or not he should have had the sign. It's just the whole concept of, did he have a right to have the sign, right? And he said, and I believe him, he said, because he was kind of like a little jokester. And he says in his deposition that he just saw it on a bumper sticker. And he thought it was a cool thing to say, and he wanted to get on camera because it was the running of the torch, of the Olympic torch. And he was like, "Hey, what can I do so that I can get on camera for this? This is, internationally watched." And so he was like, "This is what I'm going to do," right? And so, not like he was telling everybody to go out and do anything. He said he saw it on a bumper sticker and he thought it was cool, and he put it on a sign. An actual 14-foot banner is still, we had it up at the Freedom Forum for a while, but funding, of course, for free speech goes first. So I'm not sure actually where it is now, but it does still exist. Like we still have it. It's like for us, the Constitution, like we've got the banner, right? So that's where it is. And I like to see more people, of course, go into education with this foundation. And sometimes too, I talk to other scholars that don't do this work, and they're like, "Oh, teachers should be doing," and I'm like, hold on, let me show you what teachers do before you tell me what teachers, and they didn't learn, and it's like, wait a minute, hold on, right? And so when you pull it out and say, here's what the curriculum doesn't have, and here's what the curriculum does have, and here's how much time they do have, and you're like, oh, okay. So I would like to see, and I'm sure that we all would like to see, more involvement on the part of everyone when it comes to helping students realize that they have a voice. Because if they don't realize that they have a voice, we're going down a real sad path, and we can't afford to do that, right? We can't afford to do that. We need them to be able to speak out. We need them to be able to know it's right to speak up. We like to say this whole concept, if you see something, say something, right? But in the same light, we tell them, hey, don't talk to me in school, or don't tell me what's going on. It's like, wait a minute, hold on, right? Think about what you want to do. And I also, I experienced it as being a former advisor myself, is when I gave them the power to write about whatever they wanted to write about, when I said, here's the rules, guess what they wrote about? Real stuff. Like real things that dealt with their school, and how they didn't want to write about anything profane or obscene. That wasn't important to them. It was important to them of their experience that they were having as high schoolers. And it was important to them that their friends understood the responsibility of voting. It was important to them that people understood the responsibility of doing well on standardized tests and coming to school. And, this is what you need to do to apply for financial aid. And this is how you get into college. And you could do this too. That's what they were. They were never at like, let's write about, this other stuff. No, not that. It's like, stop quitting you join a club, stay in a club. You join an activity, stay in the activity to the end. You can hate it, but stop being a quitter. That's what they wrote about. They didn't write about all the stuff that people think. And it's so funny because the legislatures are scared to death of student speech. Like, what do you think they're going to do? Trust me. they're not, that's not what they do. With good guidance, good advice, good backgrounds, good foundations, good histories, they really want to be just like us in a democracy. They just want to be good democratic citizens, helping those. And that's what journalism is all about. How do you educate those? How do you give them the actual power? How do you show them the purpose of what you want them to do? That is the foundation, and that's the background, and that's what we should be doing. So I think I'm done. Does anybody have any questions? We got anything in the chat? Because, I could just keep talking, but I'd like to answer a question or two. I see a couple of heads nodding, and I like to know what, did I say something that made you go, wow, or that's crazy, or any of that? Anybody?
So I have one, if I can go first.
Sure. Oh.
Right over here in Zoom. So this idea of the profanity or the taboo subjects and the limits on those things, one of the things that I think is interesting is that the sensibilities that define that are constantly changing.
Right.
Right. So have you ever seen anything that created tension there? Maybe not, well, obviously not being profane for the sake of being profane, but to use a word that to someone's else's sensibilities
right.
is profane, and it creates that tension.
So going back to what I said about training. So in my actual scholastic journalism class, when I had journalism, 1 through 3 or whatever, I had an editor and co-editors and all this kind of stuff, and I was the advisor. And the actual diagram for that is that the advisor trains and steps to the side and allows the students to be editors, and because you say to them, this is your publication, it's not mine, right? It has nothing to do with who I am as a person, but this is a representation of you. Your name goes on every story. So I loved to see somebody bring up an idea that might even be profane or just a little bit lewd, and then the discussion, occurs. The debate goes back and forth. The one that I remember was the guy wanted to say, like, what is it, 10 ways to get a girl or something like that? 10 ways to get a girl or 10 ways to dump a girl or something. And it was like, dude, the editor and the co-editor are both female. You think that this is going to go by? But and so they let him write the story. They were like, sure, write the story so you can get credit for writing the story, but they didn't publish it because they thought that the subject matter was obscene, and they thought that the subject matter was disrespectful, and so they didn't publish it. But me watching this whole thing, they're really participating in democratic society without me doing anything. I'm sitting on the sideline kind of chuckling, going, ooh, this is going to see how this is going to go. And I didn't think that I was going to have to step in because I was, once again, we have to give high school students credit. And I mean, and anybody who's worked with some high school students know, they will make the right decisions, and, even if I may have to say, hey, y'all think y'all might want to look at that one again? I didn't have to. I've had to do that on other stories, but on that story, no. So, like I said, I think that if you tell them, once again, that they have the right to write about real topics that affect them and their society and, their everyday life, they'll choose that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay. If we can do a follow-up, if you want to explore this further. Beyond even the language, then what about like the actual taboo-ness of the topic, right? Where administration might think that something is inappropriate, but it is much more accepted amongst the student body. The idea of gender or sexuality, right, or those kinds of things. Where does that cross that line?
Well, so practice number one is that if schools have a really good advisor, whether or not it's TV, broadcasting, newspaper, yearbook, that advisor should have a good working relationship with administration. So I would, if there's going to be something that I think might be a little I need to get him ready for, I would visit my principal and say, listen, let's talk about what's going to be coming out on the next television broadcast, you know. So back in the day, we did a talk show with one of our students who was, you know, proclaimed himself as a homosexual. So we sat down and we had a conversation. We called it The Couch. We had our own little talk show. So this was 2000, you know, 1999 kind of thing. And so we sat down with he and I and a mic. And actually what happens is in that situation, I was the talent. So the students told me what to do. So I wasn't in charge of anything. So they, you know, they wrote the interview questions and, you know, we did the tape. And then I had faculty members and even the administrator come to me and say, wow, right, that was well done. And, you know, this is kind of the way it kind of worked. But it really is, it takes someone to say, hey, wait a minute, let's make sure we're looking at this. Let's have the discussion. This individual was very comfortable at the time, and he was like, listen, I'm okay with having this conversation. And, you know, the students had approached him about having the conversation and everything, and so I thought that was great. So it's always kind of preparing people. I think I told somebody the other day, the one time at the one that I can remember last where some parents got upset about something we had published. It was actually an April's Fool edition, and the parent was upset because I think the student had written a story about Oprah coming to give money away, and because she was ready to, you know, she had filled out the form and everything to get the money, and she thought that there was really like some money coming down, like Oprah was going to do her favorite ththings, and she got really upset and called the principal. And you know, we were at the PTA meeting, and I was like, "Are y'all serious?" So I think what the moral of that is that sometimes what we think is going to be like the blow up doesn't become the blow up. And it's something that we're like, why are you upset about? You know, why is this, you know, an issue is what becomes the blow up, which comes back to like the young lady who wanted to wear, you know, didn't want to wear the feathers and stuff and kind of wanted to just wear the suit. It's like, you know, why was that a blow up? I mean, shouldn't she wear, as long as she's not wearing anything that's, you know, and then maybe if she wants to wear chicken feathers in her senior picture, you know, it's like, isn't it her senior picture? Isn't it the student's, you know, yearbook kind of thing, right? But it's always disrespecting the school. That's what my brother always says. I'm like, dude, get a grip. It's not always that way. So it is a teeter-totter, and it is a balancing act, and it is being able to know what's culturally acceptable. The students did the point counterpoint, which is an editorial where one is for and one is against, and that was using the N-word. And I was at where was I? I was at Miami Norland Senior High School, and it wasn't something that I didn't want it. I was like, I really did not want that. And but the students, I said, they had to prove to me that they had done the research, and, you know, they were historically correct and so forth and so on. And so, you know, whether or not to use the ER or the A or whatever. And it was one of those stories that I thought was, you know, I lost a little bit of sleep over that one. But of course, they put it together, and they actually put in the newspaper with something that, like I said, somebody from another culture might have thought, oh my God, I can't believe, you know, this is happening. But, you know, my principal, everybody was like, okay. I mean, they get upset over stuff when the students like, oh, no principal showed up at the girls' soccer game. You know, they want to call me down for that. Like, why did she write that? I'm like, are you kidding me? There's a front page story about, you know, controversy about, you know, the fact that we have no money for library books or computers, and you're all upset about the fact that they said you don't show up to a soccer game, right? So, but once again, you know, what's important to people is not necessarily important to someone else, right? So everybody's got their own ball to carry, I guess, so to speak. So I just think that there needs to be communication between any student publication, and the community that they serve. And the administrators, especially in schools, because of the fact that they do pay my salary, the $2.50 that they give me to be the yearbook person, you know. Yeah, and I'm saying it because it turns out to be $2. And that's what I used to tell my students, like, y'all giving me all of this hassle over $2 every paycheck. Like, you know, back then it could get me like a Happy Meal. Now, you know, I give me like a small fry. But Yeah, it's having a good trained advisor, and I've always said that, having someone in charge that is very well trained, and having someone in charge who understands how important this is and is not trying to chill their speech. But, and to think about my journalism professor, my journalism teacher back in the day, and my government teacher, and, how I'm so happy that they said to me, yeah, you have a right to say these things. And they were a lot, like I said, they were a lot more stricter than what we have now. But they allowed us to, so and to be part of the democratic process. And for minorities, I think that's even more important than a lot of the other stuff. Yeah. Anybody else? Comments even?
I have a question.
Go for it, Sherry.
You said the Supreme Court is very afraid of students raising their voice, but you didn't speculate as to why they're afraid. Go ahead, speculate.
Well, so we had pretty much I want to say a Democratic-leaning court during, when we had Hazelwood, even when we had Tinker, and then there was one, I always want to say Frazier, but it'll come to me anyway. So Bethel. So Bethel was the one that was really kind of funny. This kid wrote a speech, like he was a campaign manager, and he wrote a campaign manager for his speech for his candidate, and then he used some very suggestive wording that wasn't profane. It was just very suggestive, and he's like, I'm protected by political speech, and the Supreme Court said, nah, so sorry, that doesn't work in this way. It is student speech. So I think that we had more of a leaning court that thought about democracy in that case, right? And then when we get to actually, to Frazier, to Matthew Frazier and Bongheads for Jesus, they started to say, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe we need to pull back. And Clarence Thomas also wrote the dissenting opinion in that case, where he said that principals and vice principals should have the right to tell students basically what to do and what they can write about in school, and how we need to pull back. He actually called for Tinker to be reviewed and reversed. He's like, we need to look at Tinker again, and this was a mistake by the Supreme Court, and so forth and so on. So, and then all of the cases that kind of went with because it was like, this was when we were at a 5-4. So I keep, it's always funny to say that was, because they talked about all of the cases that went through the Supreme Court at that time, how they were won or lost by 1 point. So this is where you really had, during that time in 2007, early 2000s, I guess, is you really had this court that was kind of teetering, like, which way do we go? Which way do we go? How do we kind of look at that? And so then after that, it was very hard for them to even see a case, right? So this case with the cheerleader was the first one since then, right? And so the whole concept of, you have some saying, like I said, it's definitely going to be based on what's going on into the community. That's why I believe they saw this case, because there were cases before about speech that wasn't on campus, right? So off-campus speech, how do you regulate it? And no one touched it. Like the Supreme Court wouldn't touch it. But now with the advent of social media, they said, listen, this is about time that we actually see a case that has to do with speech that is conducted outside. So it's this whole concept of I guess push and pull, where it's trying to decide, we know that they're supposed to have one, but when they're inside the school, when they are a student, when they're not 18 years, how do we figure out what they can and can't do? So who has control? Do the parents have control? Do teachers have control? Like, does a student, when does that have to do? So the whole concept of not wanting to invade in family, privacy, family values, and also the whole concept of not wanting to pass a law or pass any legislation that regulates what's in schools. So they really want administrators to have the right to say what goes on in their schools. So it's a scare, because, if you pass any legislation that's kind of, blanket legislation, and you don't know the actual, little peculiarities of every school, because we can talk about the differences between the schools in Dade County and within 3 miles of each other. The composition, how much money they get, just what the classes have, everything. So they're afraid to kind of jump into that And that means tying the hands of the administrators. Yeah, very good question. Thanks, Sherry. But yeah, and it is a very gray area. But like I said, I think that having the variables together, a well-trained, advisor, getting someone in, saying, here's what we want to do, training students how to use their voice. And I think that too often or not, we go to, well, just don't say anything, rather than here's why you should say it, here's what you should say, here's how you should say it. Right. You had a question, or you just adjusting? Okay. Yeah. Because, Malcolm X, who was, of course, a controversial issue, but said in a speech in Alabama to some high schoolers, is like, we need to stop teaching kids what to think and teach them how to think, right? So the whole concept of, I don't care what it's not going to make me feel bad if you believe in something that I don't believe in, but I just want you to be able to, support it, stand on it, give me the facts that have to go behind it, let's agree to disagree, that kind of thing. Even as something, and I always use in my classes, and my example is like, I love the Miami Dolphins. It's a hard job to be a Dolphin fan. But, I could substantiate why I like the Dolphins, right? And so it's like, I don't like, when someone says, well, I like the Dallas Cowboys, well, why do you like them? I don't know, right? So then it's like, wait a minute. So, that's what I want us to be able to start thinking as we talk about critical thinking all the time. It's such a catchphrase, critical thinking. But what does that mean, right? It means doing the research and saying, this is why I came to this conclusion. This is why I came to this opinion, which is fine, right? So you can think the world is flat. That's good. I think it's round, but let's talk about it, right? I saw a Facebook post today. Someone said about Kamala Harris and how, oh, well, she's just kind of disappeared. She played the black card and left. I said, well, what do y'all think she's supposed to do? She's not going to go and put on a show like Beyonce. I mean, I don't really know what y'all want her to do. She's doing her job. It's like, do you know what the job of the vice president is? And they're like, crickets. I'm like, see, you're making these comments or making this conversation, and you don't even know what she's supposed to do. And I was like, I've been voting ever since I was 18. I can't even tell you the names of all the vice presidents that I voted for. I don't have any idea who they are. I'd have to think like, oh yeah, right? But, I remember Mondale only because Mondale lost like crazy. That was the first election I got to vote in, and he like won one state, his home state, and Reagan won everything else. It was like, okay. So, it's just this whole concept of, we talk about critical thought, but it all ties back into compulsory education. It all ties back into democracy. It all ties back into trying to get people to use voice to really do something, right? And the ones, there's people using voice right now that are doing something, not maybe what we want them to do, but, just why it's important to speak up. Anybody else? Are we done? Am I done? Time? No more questions? Well, thank you again for allowing me to speak today. It's great to be back on MMC.
All right. Thank you for being here today. And we hope to see you all next week, which is the last Tuesday Times Roundtable for this semester. And then we'll have a new lineup come spring. But I do hope that you leave today and think about how you can make your voice heard, considering the fact that you need to do the research to back up your opinions and your positions, and then make that voice heard. Thanks again.